All right, it's a beautiful day here in Ohio, and we're on to part number 6. Okay, so for part number 6, we have the hot side parts final welded as far as everything leading up to the turbo. We got the manifolds torqued, so we've got it final welded. We've got everything coated with the high temp paint. We've cured it with heat gun and a torch just to make sure that it's more durable, and then also hit it with some titanium header wrap. Now here's the completed hot side. Everything's welded up, mounted. See there, I did opt to keep the ball flanges. They may leak, they may not. If not, I can swap those out, no big deal. But got the O2 sensor placement mounted. Of course, I didn't do a video on that. I just basically went with the factory locations for those. Everything's all here. The V-bands are done. As you can see, the V-bands fit together very nicely. Wastegate is in and mounted. And here's the actual flange mounting. So now that I have all of that fabricated up, I'm going to be installing it, and then we're going to get on to the oil system. Now for the oil, I went ahead and went with Vortex recommendations on their supercharger kit, where to tap into the oil pan and where also to get the oil feed. Now, as far as oil feed fittings go, it's 1/4 inch MPT off of the blocks. What I'm going to do is do 1/4 inch MPT into the block, then tee it off to the factory sensor or an aftermarket oil pressure gauge. I have both, but I may go with the factory sensor. And then also went with a 1/4 to 1/8 MPT adapter here on the other end, but also to a dash 4 AN for the feed. Now, as far as the feed goes, I'm actually going to create my own instead of just buying a pre-cut one. And what I did is I got some lines and fittings from Amazon, and these are just random. I mean, most people will just order the feed and return lines. I opted to just make my own, and I have plenty of extra here because we're going to also be using this on my boys SC300 when we come time to do that. Now, as far as oil return, I actually went a lot of overkill because I actually had planned on fabricating something wild, which was going to be a remote mount turbo system with a GT35R and a T3 in the back of the car, but I decided to just go with a traditional mount. So with that being said, I have a lot of extra oil return lines. So what I did is I got the dash 10 oil return fitting, a straight. I also have a 90 just in case it's needed off the oil pan, but I actually have opted to do the old punch and tap method for a 5/8 return. So it's going to have dash 10 off of the turbo down into the oil pan with the barb fitting. Now I know it's like a hodgepodge of all, mixed parts, this and that, but I've done this a few times and I know this stuff's going to work. Now I don't need to go into where to tap the oil pan and stuff because Vortex has that information readily available. Actually, a lot of people do. I believe it's 5/8 inch down and 1 5/8 inch over or something. And don't quote me on that, but it goes right down below the actual harmonic balancer. So you just got to be really careful in that area because you want to make sure that you don't put the oil return anywhere to where it's going to be interference with the belt, for one. And then also, that's why I made my turbo piping lower than where that mount point is, because I didn't want my actual oil return to come anywhere around that as far as having to snake around it. So that's the reason I made it a little lower into the system. So what I'll do is I'll actually go through, punch a small hole in that position in the oil pan, and I'll step up to a larger punch every time I go in, and that will open up that hole and also create like a flare on the inside of the pan. And then I'll use my MPT tap fitting and tap that out. But what I'll do is, like a lot of people do, is they'll put grease on the fitting, so that way any metal chips that come off, they'll stick to the grease and they won't get into the oil pan. But then I'll also change the oil in there just for a precaution to flush all that stuff out as well. Now that's going to wrap up part number 6. So hopefully part number 7, that's going to be downpipe fabrication, and whether I want it to come out the driver's side or the passenger side of the bumper. I do have the trim ring and everything, and I'm going to use Motion Raceworks instructions on how to do a bumper exit exhaust. You guys got to check that out. Those guys are extremely knowledgeable on how they do this, and their telescoping method and actually marking and tracing on the inside of the bumper instead of the outside is actually pretty genius. And it's kind of juvenile, really, and common sense, but I mean, when you get so far into this, people get flustered and they kind of miss those little mini steps. Also, another question I had, people had messaged me a lot about, and that is the EGR fitting. Since I'm using 2 driver side headers, I went to Home Depot and I got a 5/8 MPT plumbing cap, and it actually threaded on there very nice. Both are brass, and just tighten it down real good. And actually, it seems to be a perfect fit. So if you're running into that and you don't know what kind of fitting you want to use, or what fitting to use to cap that off, and you don't want to weld it shut or modify anything else, that's a perfect option. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and get all this stuff finally mounted, hard mounted, and you want to make sure everything's good and tight, and then we're going to get into part number 7, and that's downpipe fabrication. So don't forget to like and subscribe, guys, and we're going to see you on the next one.